He hasn't invented a consumer device like the iPad, or a search service like Google, or a social network like Facebook. But the industry he helped to develop, hydraulic fracturing for natural gas, is transforming the American economy. Today on Uncommon Knowledge, shooting in Dallas, Trevor Rees-Jones. Uncommon Knowledge, now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Be sure to visit us on our website, by the way, at hoover.org/UK or on Facebook at facebook.com/unckknowledge, facebook.com/UNC knowledge. A native of Dallas, Trevor Rees-Jones attended Dartmouth College, received his law degree from Southern Methodist University, practiced law for a number of years, got bored, and, well, we'll let Mr. Rees-Jones tell the rest of the story. Now the chairman of Chief Oil and Gas, Mr. Rees-Jones serves on the boards of trustees of Dartmouth and Texas Christian University. In 2006, Mr. Rees-Jones and his wife established the Rees-Jones Foundation, a philanthropy to help the underprivileged in North Texas. Trevor Rees-Jones, welcome to Uncommon Knowledge.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be with you.
Segment 1, the making of an entrepreneur, hard times. Trevor Rees-Jones, I'm quoting you, Trevor. When I graduated from Dartmouth in 1973, I wasn't very entrepreneurial or innovative. Then in 1983, this is after you practiced law for a number of years in a big Dallas firm, I came to the conclusion that I'd be miserable if I had to be a lawyer for the rest of my life. Close quote. What was so bad about the law?
Well, it wasn't a matter of what was so bad about the law. It was a matter of it just didn't interest me, and I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, being a lawyer. And when I graduated from college, I didn't have the slightest idea what I wanted to do. And 2 years later, on reflection, I think I went to law school just defaulting into...
Your dad was a lawyer in town.
My father was a lawyer here in Dallas, and I'd spent the 2 years after college trying to develop an interest without success, so I went to law school because I didn't have anything else to do. So I guess it's no secret under those circumstances that I'd get down the road about 6 years and find that I had not found what I was passionate about, had not developed an interest as a career. And so that's what caused me to reflect and change.
So it's 1983, you've been out of college for 10 years, you've gotten bored with the law, and you decide to go into energy. And that's interesting to me because Texas is energy. It's not as if you were looking for an opening that a lot of other energetic, intelligent people weren't already in Texas. Why'd you go into oil and gas?
Well, because it interested me so much. Now, the interest developed because in my law practice, I did oil and gas bankruptcy work. We were representing service and supply companies on creditors' committees in the bankruptcies and the workouts, and I found myself in these meetings where I was supposed to be thinking about all the legal aspects. I found myself concentrating on and wishing to concentrate on all the business aspects. So I got to actually early 1984 and made the change from a law practice to a businessman in the oil and gas industry.
But you went into it with a detailed knowledge of, so to speak, the nuts and bolts of the industry. You knew how to do a deal, you knew how financings worked, right? That's correct? Oh, no?
No.
Oh.
I thought I did, but on reflection, I knew very little.
Okay.
I had just enough of a toe in the water in those areas to be interested, and again on reflection, I thought I knew a whole lot more than I actually did.
All right, let me quote you once again, Trevor Rees-Jones. Quote, my first 10 years, good long time, my first 10 years in the oil and gas business from 1984 to 1994, I drilled a lot of dry holes. It was tough going. Close quote. What went wrong?
Well, I don't know that I'd say that I'd classify it as going wrong, although I'm certain others would. What I did during those 10 years was engage in some fairly high-risk exploratory work. I drilled mostly exploration wells, which by their very nature carry a great deal of risk and results in a lot of dry holes. So, well, I guess I was trying to make the big hit.
Was that because you were a young man? Do you think that was partly use?
Yes.
You wanted to
I
just
was
go
excited, I was enthusiastic, I wanted to find a big oil field, I wanted to get it all done at once, and it took me about 10 years of, I could say either periodically or perpetually setting myself on fire to get to the point to realize I had to find a different way to go about this and lower my risks somehow.
Okay. By the way, I've been quoting you from remarks you gave at the Tuck Business School at Dartmouth, and you said to close out this period of 10 years when you drilled a lot of dry holes, that you did learn one important lesson, quote, "I found I enjoyed what I was doing," close quote. So that's
Yes.
10 years of difficulty and frustration, but you loved it.
I did. And I guess in that talk, I think I also mentioned, I don't know exactly how the saying goes, but whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, something to that effect. And adversity really can teach you a great deal, help you develop more self-confidence in yourself and in your endeavors. Notwithstanding the difficult times that I faced, and there were many different times when I was...
You told me once you actually had to cancel call waiting to save $3 a month on your phone bill.
Oh yeah. That's not all we did. We canceled cable. That was a big one, $40 a month or $30 a month. But we got down to canceling call waiting and call forwarding. That was $3 a month each. But the one I'm really proud of is I turned my toll tag in. Here in Dallas, we have what's called the Dallas North Tollway. And you could pitch in 2 quarters and it cost you 50 cents. If you had a toll tag, they'd charge you 55 cents on your credit card. So to save that extra nickel, I turned my toll tag in. So that was actually the early 1990s. I'd been in the oil and gas business for several years. It was a tough time. But getting back to your main point, Peter,
Right.
It was a business that I really enjoyed. Notwithstanding the difficult times and the adversity and the dry holes, we did manage to find just enough about every 2 or 3 years to keep going. And it was a business and an endeavor that I really enjoyed. So one of my points to the audience at Tuck at the conference was, be sure and pick a career. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, don't gravitate to trying to make the most amount of money. Gravitate to what you really enjoy. Find what your interest and your passion is and pursue it, because there are going to be a lot of difficulties that you're going to face, and you can't do it unless you really enjoy what you do.
So that 10 years, last question before we get to when things turned around, that 10 years you now view as a necessary apprenticeship. In some way you almost didn't deserve success until you'd done pay. Is that, I get the feeling that's the way you think about that.
I think so.
All
I guess I haven't thought about it in those exact terms, but I would agree with what you just said.
All right. Segment 2, the making of an entrepreneur, success. 1994, you decided to reduce your risks. To me, this is just so remarkable. The moment you decide to begin a less risky way of proceeding in business is the moment things begin to turn around for you. And you move up to you start drilling for natural gas in the decades-old Fort Worth Basin in North Texas, and you called it, quote, picking the last meat off the old bone, close quote. In 1999, you shift to the Barnett Shale deposit, and here's where things get especially interesting. You start employing a new technique. All right, let's hear it. Can you give me, as a layman, you know me well enough to know I'm an especially slow layman, Trevor, so hydraulic fracturing is what? How does it work?
Let me first say, I don't want to leave your audience with the impression that I invented or I was the first to start using hydraulic fracturing.
Right.
Fracking the short term
Yep.
for hydraulic fracturing, had been used as early as the 40s and 50s. And in fact, in the Barnett Shale, George Mitchell, head of then Mitchell
Legendary
Energy
name
and
in the
Development,
business, right?
yes, is credited with banging away at the Barnett Shale through experimenting with various fracking techniques and its technology to ultimately bring about success in the Barnett Shale, which has, we now know, has led to the natural gas shale revolution.
Right.
That has clearly revolutionized energy here domestically in the United States. But back to, what the hell was your main question?
Well, the question was, how does it work?
Yeah.
Fracking,
Yeah.
fracking is a word that's in every newspaper
Right.
twice a week these days. What is it? How does fracking work?
I can tell you fairly simply.
Okay.
Fracking is nothing more than creating artificially
Right.
in the particular rock or strata or zone permeability that does not otherwise exist there naturally, which is necessary for the production of hydrocarbons, oil and gas. In other words, the two main criteria that are required for the production of oil and gas are porosity, which is the pore space in the rock that holds the volume of oil or gas.
Got to be able to seep through the rock.
That's
to your pipe.
permeability.
Oh,
Porosity is the pore space.
okay.
If it has pore space, but those pores are not connected and have no way of connecting, then permeability is not there naturally, and fracking is what is the process of injecting into the formation at high pressure, basically water and sand to act as a proppant, an artificial permeability that does not naturally exist in the rock to allow those pore spaces to connect and to allow oil and gas to migrate from their trapped pore spaces through the fracture. Now, the fractures that have been artificially created, which is the permeability to the wellbore, and be produced.
And then there's a second big innovation. You've just explained that fracturing actually goes back some decades, but the technology comes along. George Mitchell is experimenting. It becomes deployable in the mid-90s in a major way. You play a major role in that. And then the second innovation is horizontal drilling.
That's correct.
And explain that.
Yet horizontal drilling was tried long before
Oh, that's old as well?
the shale
I hadn't realized
revolution.
that. I hadn't realized that.
Initially, if I'm not mistaken, offshore. But what we're dealing with in horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing is the further technological development of those techniques, drilling, one drilling, horizontal drilling, and the other completion, hydraulic fracturing, and the further experimentation of different ways of going about conducting a frac job to see what works to unlock the potential of all the oil and gas that have been trapped in this rock for all these millions of years. Most of the drilling that was conducted up until the last several years has been vertical wells, perhaps directional wells that would still be drilled somewhat vertically. Horizontal drilling is nothing more than the turning of the drill bit and the drill pipe perpendicularly so that there is a lateral now drilled horizontally for some distance, on average
thousands of
3,
feet
4, 5, 6,000 feet.
Okay.
It can be drilled further. It's just a matter of how much technological risk and difficulty you have in doing it, but it is quite an advancement in the oil and gas business to drill horizontally to the extent that we do today.
All right. So your first big play was the Barnett Shale here in Texas. In, let me see, what year? 2006, you sold a big chunk of that to I have a note.
Devon Energy.
Devon Energy.
Production company, our E&P assets, and Crosstex Energy as a midstream company, our pipeline assets.
Right.
In 2006. We had actually drilled our first Barnett Shale well in 1997, but we didn't shift our attention full time to the Barnett Shale from the old Ben conglomerates that George Mitchell and Mitchell Energy and Development had pioneered going back to the late 40s and early 50s. We didn't shift our attention to the Barnett Shale until 1999 and 2000.
All right.
And then it was
And
over
were you
those.
one of the first to do so?
We were among the first to concentrate on the Barnett Shale. Again, Mitchell Energy and Development and George Mitchell had spent the decades of the 1980s and the 1990s trying to find a way to get the gas out of the Barnett Shale, which was recognized as the source rock to all of the shallower Ben conglomerates and other shallower zones that are known as conventional reservoirs carrying enough porosity and permeability to produce, although those shallower zones needed frack jobs as well to increase their permeability. Mr. Mitchell and his staff at Mitchell Energy and Development was the pioneer who they are responsible for bringing about this change. We were one of a very few number of smaller companies, smaller independents, in our case a private independent, to get involved in the Barnett early on.
All right, and let's bring us up to today. Chief Oil and Gas, today you sold off your holdings in Barnett, and you continue to operate in the Marcellus Shale deposit, which is in Pennsylvania. It actually goes up into New York. We'll come to that in a moment. But you're operating substantially in Pennsylvania these days. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Segment 3, fracking and the environment. The amount of natural gas that this new technology is producing is just huge.
That's correct.
Last year, the United States became a net exporter of petroleum products, largely because of natural gas, for the first time since 1949. I've read figures suggesting that in the Marcellus deposit alone, 60,000 jobs have already been created. The Economist magazine predicts that over the next decade, it'll be 250,000 jobs. Tax revenues being thrown off. The benefits to the economy are just undeniable. You'd agree with me there?
They are outstanding and largely unrecognized at the present time.
Okay, well, I want to come back to that, but New York won't permit drilling. Vermont just enacted a permanent ban, not fracturing. Vermont just enacted a permanent ban on fracturing. Who knows whether there's anything to fracture under Vermont, but they just enacted a permanent ban. Over in Europe, France has banned it. Bulgaria has banned it. I know that's a terrible disappointment to you, Trevor. You wanted to go to Bulgaria.
Right. I guess I'll have to postpone expiration in Bulgaria for a while.
The recent issue of The Economist magazine contained a very neat, tight summary of the environmentalists' worries about hydraulic fracturing. Let's just take them on. The Economist, quote, "One concern is possible contamination of aquifers by methane or fracking fluids," close quote. Big concern, problem? How do we deal with it? Pollution of groundwater is basically the concern, right?
Right. I don't believe it is a big concern, but I cannot say that there is no instance where it couldn't happen. Let me explain. First of all, let me say that my position in my company, and knowing many other CEOs with many other companies, is that we all believe that we need to conduct our operations with great sensitivity and importance to the environment. I believe for the most part we do that. Are there mistakes made periodically? Yes, as in all businesses, as in all industries, as in all endeavors. I believe ours are rather few. Unfortunately, there can be a big one every now and then that gets everybody's attention. But let me just go, but rather than define whether we're dealing with a big concern or a small concern, let me try to explain how it cannot happen and how it can happen, and look at what risk we are all dealing with. Because unfortunately, fracking has taken on a connotation that in a lot of people's mind has become very fearful. And I believe the fear is greatly overblown. First of all, the argument that the conducting of a frack job in a horizontal well bore, or even in a vertical well bore at a depth of several thousand feet, these shale zones are typically between 5,000 and 15,000 feet in depth, on average 8,000 feet.
Mile and a half down.
A mile and a half down. Freshwater aquifers, by and large, will be less than 1,000 feet from the surface. So you've got, on average, at least a mile separation. The physics of the matter tell you it is an absolute impossibility for a frack job to communicate through the rock up to a shallow producing aquifer. It cannot happen.
Right.
Now, how can it happen? How can a frack job interfere with a shallow aquifer? The one way that it can happen to us nowadays is if all of the cement jobs fail. We are required by the state agencies in charge to set a certain depth of surface casing protecting all known freshwater aquifers, and to cement that surface pipe against the wellbore, against the ground, to protect the groundwater aquifers. We are required also to cement the lateral string of production casing in the horizontal wellbore.
Right.
In fact, that is required to enable us to frack where we want to frack, up and down the lateral.
You'd do that even if there weren't.
So there are at least two, absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. There are at least two cement jobs. Oftentimes, there is a third or more of intermediate pipe that are cemented. Now, when you're conducting a frack job through perforations down in a horizontal lateral in a wellbore to bust open that rock and create the fissures or fractures that are not normally or naturally there.
Right.
By the way, the reason we know that the frack job does not travel is because we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on sophisticated technology that tells us where our frack jobs go. And on average, we're moving 200, 300, maybe 400 feet away from that wellbore. So you see that's far short of a mile.
A mile, right.
But to give you the instance where a mistake can be made is if all of the cement jobs in the wellbore fail, it's possible for the frack job to travel up, all the way up the wellbore because your cement jobs have failed.
Right.
And into a shallow water aquifer. That is extremely rare. Has it happened? Does it happen? The answer is yes, but it is very rare, and I'm advised by a distinguished physician whom you and I both know that there's a 3% error rate in surgery that leads to either serious injury or death. Yet we don't stop performing surgery. There are many car wrecks throughout the United States. We don't stop driving cars. There are tens of thousands of them that injure and kill people. I'm not trying to be too dramatic here, but I'm trying to bring to bear a comparative analysis that the securing of energy for our use domestically is every bit as important as many other
Trevor,
matters.
another couple. Go
Let
ahead.
me mention, if I might,
sure.
let me try to explain. In my belief is that in the vast majority of circumstances where methane is found in a shallow water aquifer, it has migrated there naturally through the rock over millions of years. While we cannot get there from a depth through 6,000 feet of rock in a few hours or even in a few days or months, over tens of millions of years, oil and gas has migrated to shallower zones, indeed to the surface. The first natural gas
Like
and the
that
first
opening scene in the Beverly Hillbillies?
Exactly.
Where Jed shoots a...
Exactly.
Got it.
Why did they call Oil Creek outside of Titusville, where the first oil was found in the United States in the 1850s, Oil Creek? Because it had a skim of oil on top of the creek.
Naturally
How did
occurring.
it get there? It migrated from a deeper reservoir in the rock. Second of all, everybody knew that the Barnett Shale had within it trapped a tremendous amount of hydrocarbons and natural gas, and was known as a source rock for shallower zones, just like the Marcellus Shale is known as a source rock for shallower zones. Why is it called a source rock? It's because all hydrocarbons produced from shallower zones migrated there and were trapped from that deeper zone. Some of it migrated up to the surface so that Jed Clampett could shoot into the ground and the oil would bubble up. Oil on Oil Creek, outside of Fredonia, New York, natural gas bubbling on the creek there, which indicated a natural gas deposit below. So if that can happen, you see very easily and logically how natural gas can be present in shallow water aquifers without the oil and gas industry doing a thing.
Okay. Once again from The Economist magazine, quote, "The International Energy Agency estimates that measures that would properly regulate hydraulic fracturing to virtually eliminate environmental dangers would add 7% to the cost of average shale gas well," close quote. Does that sound about right? And are you happy with the regulation? Let me ask this. Are you happy with the regulation in Texas? Are you happy with the regulation in Pennsylvania? Would you rather see it federalized, the Environmental Protection Agency? Does the industry operate under a good, clean set of regulations as it stands now, or would you like to see those adjusted?
No, I believe we've done very well in the state of Texas over many decades. The state agency is called the Railroad Commission. Mm-hmm. And it has been in charge of regulating the oil and gas industry here in Texas from the very beginning.
Right.
And I believe it has the right regulations. It has the welfare of the citizens of the state in mind, and it has done an excellent job. I personally believe, because of the differences involved in many different respects, the states are in the best position to regulate the oil and gas industry. And the federal government is not very well qualified to do so. We've had an instance here in Texas where the federal government jumped in and became involved, and we find out they were operating under a premise that was totally false. And so we've done it very well here in the state of Texas. So there are other states that have been where hydrocarbons have been produced for decades that have also done a darn good job. Oklahoma's being one of them. Excuse me, but let me answer your first question about regulation.
Right.
And to my knowledge, most everybody in my business is in favor of regulations that are necessary for us to conduct our business in a manner in which the environment is protected and the overall good is served. There is the question nowadays about overregulation and taking things to an extreme level, and we do operate today in certain areas of the country where the amount of money that we are spending to comply with all of the regulations causes us to spend a great deal more than 7% in cost of the well than otherwise perhaps is necessary.
Trevor, last question about regulation then. Your advice to New York. This one's close to my heart because I grew up in the southern tier of New York, just outside Binghamton. And
right across from Susquehanna County,
You
one of the
bet
best counties in the Marcellus Shale, by the way.
Broome County, just Broome County borders Susquehanna County. It is the border between New York and Pennsylvania. And my hometown has been on economically difficult times for a few decades now, and underneath those old dairy farms up there is energy. So your advice, there'll be a question mark at the end of this, although it'll sound like a statement. Your advice to the state of New York would be, calm down, settle the issue, look at good models. Texas has a good regulatory regime. Impose the regulations that you believe are necessary to permit this industry to go forward in a way that's environmentally sound, and it is environmentally sound when it's conducted according to good regulations, and then open up the state. That's what you'd say?
I would say that.
All right.
I would say that. And let me mention two things here. I know the concern in New York is about their aquifer.
Right.
And I can't really advise anybody what to do with that level of concern. So I'll qualify my answer that way. But I can tell you that the largest aquifer in the United States is the Ogallala Aquifer that runs from South Dakota down to West Texas. And there have been thousands, probably tens of thousands of wells drilled through the Ogallala Aquifer and fracked. And there is not an instance of pollution of the aquifer known or documented. Second of all, from the standpoint of Broome County, the economic benefit, unless you're going to get into this a little bit later.
Go ahead.
The economic benefits that were down to the local citizenry and the population of the town, the county, the state are just tremendous.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the number of jobs that are being created within the oil and gas industry, but then there is so much more. When we take a lease from the thousands of mineral owners and landowners who we pay bonus money to take the initial lease, then thereafter drill and create royalty income from them, all of the workers we employ, all of the landowners and mineral owners who receive their checks, spend that money in their local towns, cities, counties. They all pay taxes. We pay a great deal of taxes. As most everybody knows, everybody pays, well, here in Texas, we pay a property tax or an ad valorem tax on our homes,
right,
which is about 2% of the value that is determined for your home. Well, we do that with our oil and gas wells and our reserves. They are valued annually here in Texas, and we are charged ad valorem taxes, which we pay, which are used by the counties to build roads, to remediate roads, to build schools. Most of the money goes into the schools and the hospitals. In addition to that, there are production taxes that go to all of the states, and then we all pay our income taxes. I'm not, by the way, I want to make this clear, I'm not against paying taxes. I'm very much in favor of paying taxes. I'd like to see the revenue used in some better ways. But this is what America is all about, is pursue your dream, develop a business, realize revenue, and pay the taxes that go to benefit the rest of the country. This industry is such a huge economic engine. Now that hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling has been brought to bear in these shale plays, first in the natural gas business, being moved and applied successfully to oil reservoirs now that will bring about a tremendous change there, just like we've seen in natural gas. This is a way, if not the way, to bring about economic revitalization throughout the United States.
Segment 4. What the boom
Is that a
means.
good enough
That's a
sales
pretty
job
darn
for
good.
you?
It's a pretty segment 4. What the boom means for us, Trevor. Every president of the United States, without exception, beginning with Richard Nixon, has called for energy independence in this country. Beginning with Richard Nixon, way back in the early 1970s. Presidents of the United States were unable to bring it about. Now let me quote you. Trevor Rees-Jones, speaking this past spring at Dartmouth College, quote, "It may very well be possible to be completely energy independent in 10 years, close quote. So I'm going to give you a chance to think about that and see if you want to stick with it. What Trevor Rees-Jones is saying is that free markets and technological advances will achieve what every president of the United States since Richard Nixon failed to achieve.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
You're not going to back off that.
No. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not giving any guarantees. If I recall the sentence you read, I said may. Is may in there?
That's true.
I'm feeling pretty strongly
It may
about
very well be possible.
It may very well be possible.
Well, I'm trying to sort of get past that because it's stronger.
Yeah, I think you were trying to get me to guarantee something. I'm not going to do that. But I can tell you that this has been a change in mentality among many of us in the oil and gas business only in the last year or two. 10 years ago, for example, nobody would have thought that. And we were in tough shape. For example, in the natural gas arena, we were down to a 7-year supply domestically of natural gas. All these LNG plants were being built looking to the future to import LNG from our friends in the Middle East.
Look, LNG is liquefied natural gas.
Liquefied natural gas.
You cool it, compress it, and ship it.
That's correct. As a result of what has been brought about over the last 10 years, we now have over 100-year supply of natural gas. There have been, well, that's one of the reasons the price has collapsed so dramatically.
Actually,
down
to
$2.5.
But
let me point out that instead of looking forward to importing LNG into this country, many of these facilities that have been built will be used, hopefully in the not too distant future, to export gas.
Got it. Let me ask you about pricing, because I can't for the life of me figure this out. For years, and understandably enough, the price of oil and natural gas moved in tandem.
That's correct.
There was about, for a given unit of energy, there was about a 6-to-1 ratio.
That's the physics of the matter. That's the BTU, the energy equivalent physically. That's correct.
Which makes all the sense in the world, because really when it comes down to it, who cares where you get your energy? You want to pay roughly the same cost per unit of energy.
Right. 6 MCF equals 1 barrel of oil of energy.
Got it. And in the past couple of years, those prices have broken apart. Right. And the price of oil has not jumped, but steadily climbed, let's say that. And the price of natural gas, I don't think it's too much to say the price of natural gas has plummeted. In fact, here this past spring, it dropped below, for a time at least, it dropped below $2 per, what's the name of that unit again?
MCF.
MCF.
Or actually MBTU, but let's simplify it and say MCF.
Per unit, it dropped. So why did the price of these two things decouple? What's going on? I do not understand the market there.
Basically two things. First of all, even though the BTU equivalent would be 6 MCF equals 1 barrel of oil, it rarely traded on that parity. But it was fairly close. Back in the 80s and the 90s, for a good bit of time, the price of oil might be $18 or $20 a barrel, and natural gas might be $1.80 or $2 an MCF. So 10 to 1.
They move together.
10 to 1, say.
Okay.
Well, we had a period of time this spring, as you pointed out, where oil was around $100 a barrel and gas was down at $2 an MCF. So it has dramatically disconnected. That's a 50 to 1 ratio. And even with oil declining to $84 or $83 a barrel today and gas at $2.25, you still have a huge ratio difference. Okay, why the disconnect? Well, first of all, gas is priced domestically. It is not as global a product as oil is. Oil can be transported a lot more easily than natural gas. Yes, Brent and West Texas Intermediate have disconnected to a degree. One might be $90, the other might be $110. But natural gas, for example, while it trades around $2 or $2.50 here domestically, in Japan it'd be $15, $16 an MCF. So The global market pricing is different because you cannot move the product around. The second reason is that we have found so much natural gas here in the United States, it has nowhere to go. We're not set up to export to these other countries, which in due course may bring about an equalization of the price. But right now we've found such a tremendous amount of supply, and the demand is not there to soak up the supply, therefore the price plummets.
So what has happened in your industry with hydraulic fracturing and this huge new supply of natural gas represents a huge advantage specifically for the United States of America?
Absolutely, and it redounds to the tremendous benefit of our consumer.
Okay, now,
what has happened? We have lowered the cost of energy here in the United States. Right now with natural gas, and I believe we will do it over the next several years by increasing our oil reserves and production dramatically and bring about a lower price there.
one sector that's going to benefit disproportionately is the sector that we hear over and over and over again over the last 20 years has been flat on its back, and that's manufacturing. Is that not correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That cheap energy is a huge component of running any big plant, no matter what you're making.
Yes.
So manufacturing ought to begin to experience a renaissance in this country.
Well, it already is. Chemical plants, fertilizer plants, others use natural gas as a source of their energy, as their feedstock. And there are many instances of plants now being manufacturing companies relocating from whatever international country they moved to 20 years ago to come back and build further plants here in the United States to use our cheap energy.
Next question about that is this. China's a big country, India's a big country. These have huge demands for energy. They must sit on top of some natural gas. On the other hand, they don't have our legal infrastructure. They don't have, as I understand it, they don't have, well, you got into this as a lawyer. You know how to negotiate property rights with folks who own old played-out farms in northeastern Pennsylvania. So they don't have property rights. They don't. What I'm poking for here is how quickly could China or India, let's take China, because we all have the impression that when the Chinese set their minds to do something, they get it done. That may be to some extent true, to some extent untrue, but let's take China. Can they catch up? Can they begin tapping their own natural gas the way we have?
Catch up in what respect? In developing their resources like we have? I am exclusively domestic, limited to drilling onshore United States, so I don't profess to be an expert on international matters, Peter, but let me take a stab at it. Of course, as you pointed out, they don't have the free market and private mineral rights at work like we do here in the United States. Whether that would help them do it faster or slower, I don't know. Taking China, for example, they recognize they have a huge energy problem from the standpoint of their growing population and their modernization of their economy. I would anticipate they are moving forward quickly to develop their natural resources as best they can. Whether they have within their borders or whether India has within their borders, including offshore, the oil and gas that are necessary to fuel their economy, I don't know. I would guess not, seeing how China has worked ferociously over the last several years in locking up a great many natural resources in various countries in Africa. The United States is generally recognized at this point from the standpoint of shale gas and unconventional resource hydrocarbons. The United States is generally believed to have an abundance of these difficult to produce resources that we are producing now relative to Europe and Asia.
Okay, so last question in this line. We're so used to hearing that particularly since we're used to hearing that manufacturing is on its back, that jobs are going overseas. We're used to hearing since the financial crisis of 2008, that the United States has seen better days, that we're at this new normal, it's called, of low growth, and that this country has become an old country and played out. And what Trevor Rees-Jones is saying is, I may not be a politician, I may not be an economist, but I'm an energy man, and the news I see is almost unbelievably good. Fair?
From an energy standpoint,
yep,
I would say.
I'm sure there are plenty of ways we could screw it up, but the energy news is fantastically good.
No, it is. It is a new day and age in a 150-year-old business. Over the past several decades, until the last few years, our energy sources were drying up. We were buying more and more oil from foreign countries, many of which are unfriendly to us.
Yep.
So we know where our dollars are going from that standpoint.
Let me ask you a question about that. Segment 5 now, what the energy boom means for life on the planet. Fred Smith, founder and chairman of Federal Express, spoke recently in California, and I sat there and took notes. In 2001, Fred Smith said the typical American family of 4 spent $1,500 a year on gasoline. Last year, that figure had risen to $4,000. I'm quoting Fred Smith now. What we've witnessed is the largest transfer of wealth, he's talking about from the United States to the oil-producing nations, in the history of the world, close quote. And Fred Smith went on to say that when this economy begins to experience growth again, when the American economy begins to experience growth, quote, you can count on the price of oil being raised again to extract a large share of the value. There are a lot of smart people in Riyadh, close quote. So Trevor, you're not Secretary of State, you're a businessman. But to what extent, and you've already said that the price of oil is one thing and the price of natural gas is another, but to what extent are we permitted to hope that this boom in natural gas in this country will free us from dependency on the smart people in Riyadh?
Very much so. We're very much permitted. In fact, we're encouraged. I would encourage people to think this way. And not just from the standpoint of natural gas, but from the standpoint of oil as well. Let's get our premise set initially to understand the discussion. And that is 2 things. Number 1, this new day and age in the oil and gas business that we have seen come to fruition, natural gas, and that I believe we're on the verge of bringing about in oil as well. It all has one major effect, and that is the lowering of energy. You started your discussion in talking about, speaking of what Mr. Smith said,
right,
the cost of energy to an average family.
Right.
It all will bring about lower energy costs for the American public, for the American consumer. Yes, it has these positive effects on manufacturing companies and so forth, but it's not just businesses. It's everybody who heats their home with natural gas. It's everybody who drives their car with mostly gasoline currently. The positive economic benefit to the American public is extraordinary. You cannot, if you leave the pricing of your energy in the hands of foreign countries, the Middle East or otherwise, then you're just turning your wallet over to them.
Right.
That's the number 1 premise. This is all for the benefit of the American public. The number 2 premise that we have to come to grips with, by we, I refer to the American public, is there is only one way to secure this energy now. Over the last 150 years, with porosity and a measure of sufficient permeability, all of the easy oil and gas, or most of it, has been discovered and produced, or a large measure of it has. Now, this is a slight exaggeration, but to make the point, it's real. We cannot secure this energy without fracking. I don't understand why the folks in Vermont, I understand the governor has said that we've done fine without energy for years. Well, I don't know that they have done fine without energy for years. Haven't they been turning their thermostat up in the winter to keep themselves warm? And maybe they open their windows. I don't know how many people have air conditioning there, but we're
It's
talking.
They heat those homes. They heat those homes in the winter, Trevor. We know that.
We're talking about tremendous savings that can be realized by the American public in taking advantage responsibly, environmentally and in all ways, of our new energy source. Natural gas will end up being used to fuel vehicles. It will be used as a transportation fuel. If you could use it today, it would be less than half the cost of filling up your car at the gasoline station.
Trevor, a fact and a quotation. The fact: the 1997 Kyoto Protocol on global warming requires countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Every country in Europe has ratified the Kyoto Protocol. The United States has not. Here's the quotation, once again from The Economist magazine. Quote, America's emissions have fallen over the last 5 years more than any other countries. The European Union has seen its emissions rise. Close quote. Okay. Anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the governor of Vermont arising from that fact and quotation?
As I listen to you, first of all, I certainly don't wish to present myself as an expert on the Kyoto Protocol or the politics of this matter, and The Economist obviously has in-depth research on their statistics, so I really don't know what to speak to there. I wonder, as I listen to that, is that because we have been using more natural gas in lieu of other sources of energy?
The answer is yes. The
Over the
rest of
last
the
several years.
Correct.
Natural gas is a cleaner, as we know, much more abundant now, domestic fuel that is a lot more environmentally friendly than certain other sources.
Okay.
We know that.
So Trevor, when I'm at home in Northern California, where gas is over $4 a gallon now, and I'm standing there pumping up I own a Chevy Suburban because we have 5 kids, and it actually turns out to be per gallon burned the cheapest way to get the family around. But you know that thing cuts off at $75, and I'm standing there getting steamed at Trevor Rees-Jones. And you're telling me I should not get steamed at Exxon and Trevor Rees-Jones. I should get steamed at a president who won't drill on the North Slope, who refused to permit the XL pipeline from Canada to this country, at politicians in Vermont, New York, who are standing in the way of hydraulic fracturing. I should be getting steamed at overregulation and political obstacles to Exxon and Trevor Rees-Jones. I should not be getting steamed at you. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me point out, you mentioned the pipeline, that Keystone pipeline.
Keystone,
which would bring Canadian oil down into the United States is an absolute no-brainer. The fact that we are chasing that oil potentially into Asian countries from our friendliest neighbor to the north is just absolute idiocy. It is crazy and stupid. And that alone means that no one should complain about the price of gasoline. If you are going to turn Canadian oil, if you're going to disallow Canada from bringing their oil to the United States through the Keystone pipeline for refining,
and you lose the
and
right
you're
to
going to
drive.
chase it to Asia, you, as a citizen of the United States, have no right to issue one peep of complaint about the price of gasoline, and shame on you if you do.
Two more. I'm wrapping things up here. I want to get we've talked about the business. Now I want to get your fundamental outlook, your fundamental vision. 2 quotations and 2 completely different understandings of the way the economy and really reality work. Quotation 1, here's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2012. Quote, global warming is leading to such severe storms, droughts, and heat waves that nations should prepare for an unprecedented onslaught of deadly and costly weather disasters. Close quote. Gloom and doom is on the way. Quotation number 2, the late scientist and author Michael Crichton. Let's think back to people in 1900 in, say, New York. If they worried about people in 2000, what would they worry about? Probably, where would they get enough horses, and what would they do with all the horse manure? Our models, our computer models, just carry the present into the future. They're bound to be wrong. Nobody believes a weather prediction 12 hours ahead. Now we're asked to believe a prediction that goes 100 years into the future. Has everybody lost their minds? Close quote. I know you're not a climate scientist. I know you're not a historian. But do you feel that resources are constrained in general, or do you feel that technology, free markets, somehow we're going to be, as a kind of permanent matter in a free country, we'll be able to stay ahead of the problems?
I believe that. Yes, I believe that we'll be able to stay ahead of the problems. Here's what I believe, Peter, and it's confirming your earlier comment about, I'm not an expert on these matters. Here's what I believe. And let me make clear that I'm very much in favor of alternative energy.
Sure.
If alternative, renewable energy that had absolutely no effect on the environment was available today, usable, economical, then that would be wonderful. Okay, puts me out of business. Well, all for the greater good, right? I'll go find another business. Right. But what I know is that's not the case today. And what I know is that energy fueled the Industrial Revolution, and in our country has led to an increasingly better way of life for our citizenry. If you want to see the opposite situation, you could look at certain countries around the world that have next to no electricity, have next to no energy. They may have energy, but they are not able to, for whatever reason, get to it or use it. And they live in ways that people here lived hundreds of years ago. So energy has led to a much better way of life. Let's look at how important it is. Computers. You go to bed, as many people, you probably plug in your charging device and plug in your iPhone or your iPad or BlackBerry.
That's the thing I did at the hotel last night, right?
That requires electricity. Natural gas, for example, is now being used in increasing amounts to fuel electricity. What I'm saying is you cannot use your computers without energy. And energy, for the most part, is oil, natural gas, and so forth. Today, so what I enjoy my business of oil and gas, and I enjoy, notwithstanding the adversity and the difficulties that we face, sometimes meeting loud voices against us in taking the risk and spending the money, both of which in great amounts, to drill and develop our own natural resources and bring about and offer to the American people the better way of life that this has brought about.
Trevor, last question. If I could give you a sentence or two that you could say to the American people to tell them what they need to know about fracking that they don't already know, what would you say?
Well, I guess I would say be aware of the facts, which have been largely drowned out in the hysteria that has been prevalent so far. I have noticed over the past few weeks, if not few months, a greater and better understanding separating fact from fiction. That much of what has been said to bring about great fear is not factual. And that the only way that we are going to be able to get at and develop this tremendous resource base that we have, that has so many different positive effects, is by fracking. The easy stuff has been produced. We have to create artificially the permeability that doesn't exist, and the potential damage to freshwater aquifers or the environment at large is there risk associated with the contamination of a freshwater aquifer? I cannot say it never happens, but it is very rare. And that is not fully understood. I believe that a sentiment is developed that it happens rampantly, and that is not the case. Bear in mind what I said earlier, that there have been thousands, over 10,000 frack jobs conducted on wells drilled through the Ogallala Aquifer, the largest in the United States, without contamination. So that ought to tell you something. It is very rare when it happens, but there are risks and mistakes made, albeit on a very limited basis, in all other business and industries in which we as the American public engage to realize a better way of life.
Trevor Rees-Jones, founder of Chief Oil and Gas, thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
For Uncommon Knowledge in Dallas, I'm Peter Robinson.